Welcome to the FloridaDefense.com podcast. With over 30 years of strong defense and over 30 years of even stronger results, with FloridaDefense.com, you'll never believe you can't win.
All right, you are listening to the FloridaDefense.com podcast. We are speaking to Clearwater rape defense attorney Mike Kinney. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Today, we're going to be talking about rape charges. I kind of set you up for that one, so
yeah,
let's talk about.
Well, I just want to correct you real quick.
Okay.
In the state of Florida, we don't have a crime called rape, and that isn't to say that rape, as people understand it, isn't prosecuted. It's just that we call it in the state of Florida sexual battery.
Okay.
Rape is a term that doesn't exist anywhere really in the statute.
Okay.
And a sexual battery is a crime that's defined as it basically talks about non-consensual sex. And a sexual battery talks about the either penetration of the sexual organ by either a penis, union with a sexual organ with a mouth to either the vagina or the penis, penetration of the anus. It gets pretty specific because sexual battery is actually involves a sexual organ. It can't be kissing, can't be groping, but it's actually either penetration or mouth in union with the sexual organ.
One thing you'd mentioned in the last podcast, the overview, was just the difference in if somebody was injured
Yes.
by sexual battery, right in the sentencing.
Yes, it's a in that particular section of the sexual battery statute, it says that a person 18 years of age or older who commits a sexual battery upon a person 12 years of age and injures the sexual organs of that person commits a capital felony.
Okay.
All right. Now, capital felony it's a long time ago. Florida had certain crimes that were capital felonies. Obviously, capital means charges where the sentence is they take your life. Capital punishment, for instance. It's no longer a crime where someone loses their life if they're convicted and sentenced. But capital felony now for these types of sex crimes is a life felony.
Life in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's no parole, no option for parole, no probation. It is for the rest of the person's natural life. They will spend in prison if they're convicted and sentenced of that charge.
As a criminal defense attorney, what are some of the signs that you look for in, consent is really the biggest thing here, correct?
Sure. On these types of charges, consent is the issue. It's because it's not going to be one of these strict liability type crimes where the age is, the person wasn't able to consent, by law. It's one of these issues where two people have sex, and I can tell you that as a defense lawyer, it is not uncommon where one individual might be of the impression the person is consenting, and then the other party to the act may have a different impression. That does come up. And what I look for is kind of what I mentioned in the previous podcast, things about what the relationship was or what the people were doing the moments before this sexual activity occurred. Were they intimate, prior to this act allegedly occurring? Were they planning on having sex? Was it everything that happened kind of a normal routine up until a certain point? These things matter because the prosecutor has the sole burden to prove that a crime was committed, and specifically they have to prove that sexual battery occurred, which means that they have to prove the penetration, they have to prove sex basically happened, and they have to prove that this victim did not consent. Now, people can say I didn't want to, but experience has shown me that there are times where folks, for reasons other than what happened in that immediate moment, folks say that it was a non-consensual moment. Sometimes that occurs because they're misunderstanding about some circumstances that occurred. Sometimes that occurs because there's other influences, outside influences, that cause them to change their perspective on what actually occurred. So the key is to know what the dynamic is in the relationship between the victim and the defendant. Did they know each other? What was the relationship like? Had they had sex before? And then simply look at the facts surrounding the circumstances and what occurred. Obviously, when cases are violent and people are severely injured, that's obviously a set of factors that I'd be concerned about as a defense lawyer, because in general terms, people don't typically consent to be injured, and those are cases that become a lot more serious, and they're punished a lot more seriously.
You mentioned, kind of relationship. Are there other things that you look at, communication back and forth via texting or
sure,
messaging, and just kind of see?
I've had plenty of cases where there's an allegation of a sexual battery, and there is communication subsequent to the event, where it's warm messages between both parties. They talk about meeting up later, and those are crucial pieces of evidence, because it's what happens after the fact. If this person sexually battered another individual, at least the common sense expectation is that the other person would not want to have anything to do with the other individual. They'd at least be cold and not talking about engaging in another event where they're together and meet up. So those are key. I don't know why people make things up when it happens. Sometimes there's really no reason why. My only concern is what the facts and evidence is going to be when the prosecutor is looking at my client. And my job is to look at what those factors are and find out where the weakness is. And those post-sex communications oftentimes are crucial in showing what really occurred that night.
In the last podcast, you also mentioned that, husband and wife can have non-consensual and it be considered sexual battery, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
The statute doesn't really take into account anything about the relationship, except for if there's a familial type relationship, like a father-son, father-daughter, mother-son, mother-daughter. There's an enhanced penalty for that. But there isn't some defense to sexual battery saying, hey, it's my wife, or hey, it's my husband.
Anything else that you want to cover on that?
Well, yeah, I think that the sexual battery statutes, a conviction on any type of sexual battery charge is absolutely devastating. It has a life-changing moment for a person, because if a person's convicted of any form of sexual battery, whether it be a second degree all the way up to a life in prison one, they're going to be registered under the Florida Department of Law Enforcement database as either a sexual offender or a sexual predator. And that's something that is public record, and that will be there forever unless some court decides to change it. That's something that it's very hard to recover from, I would expect. I think that when someone's name is out there on the internet and shows that they've committed a sexual crime of some type, it's very hard for them to find a place to live. It's very hard for them to find a job, and it's certainly hard for them to find an accommodating atmosphere. And whether that's well-deserved or not, the part that is so serious is when these things are maybe some crimes that people shouldn't be convicted of, is when everything's on the table. Because you have a person's life, you have a person's entire future. Even if they beat the crime, even if they go to trial and we go to trial and we're successful and the jury is convinced and they're found not guilty, it's still very hard to recover from being arrested for such a serious crime like this.
We're going to pick up on the next podcast, talking kind of in the similar realm. You've been speaking to Clearwater Rape Defense Attorney Mike Kinney with the Bauer, Kreider, and Perry Law Firm in Tampa, Florida, and the surrounding area. And this is the FloridaDefense.com podcast.
Thank you for listening to the FloridaDefense.com podcast. Our firm has over 130 years of combined legal defense experience. Strong defense, stronger results. Consultations are free. Visit FloridaDefense.com today.